shorter as our sales pitch.
We're keeping this, right?
All right.
All right.
Let me get seated first.
Okay. Hello, we're Dark World Studios. We are a publishing company. This is our first project, Acheron, and we are very excited to share this with you. I'm Travis. My day job is a anthropology student, and I am the creative director here at Dark World Studios.
My name's Joe. I, as my day job, am a biotechnologist, and I am acting as the CEO of Dark World Studios.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ryan, full-time mechanical engineer, and currently acting as the Chief Technical Officer of Dark World Studios.
So, you might be wondering what makes us different from other tabletops and what we are trying to bring to your actual tabletop. We have a bunch of different systems that we're really excited to show you. We are retrofitting a lot of existing stuff, but I think we have a great take on what we are actually trying to do. We have with character customization, it is our top priority when it comes to more than other tabletops, such as our merits and flaws system, where you can choose like that little role play like fixtures that you have in other games, but it goes more in depth and becomes a very core mechanic of how you play your character. We also have sanity, which opposed to a alignment, we instead have that your character is vulnerable, strong, and standard against different types of sanity damage. So if your character is like a hard-boiled cop, they're more used to violence and seeing corpses and stuff of that nature. Or if you are a person that dabbles in social taboos, you're more akin to being resistant against morality damage, which morality is a kind of like anything that involves not things that are culturally appropriate. And then the last thing is supernatural. Now, supernatural is just anything that the regular mind doesn't really come in contact often. That includes ghosts, aliens, and other monsters of that nature. It also, if your character is more akin to that, they're more superstitious, just stuff of that nature. Our combat system, we have a variety of weapons and armor. Our base character and base humanoid only has 6 HP on average. You can rank this up during character creation. But the average person has 6 HP, and a 9mm, which we've based most of our system off of, is a D10. So our combat is really deadly and gritty. To counteract like people dying all the time, we have also introduced a die hard system. This system prevents your character from just dying outright when you take damage, because you can choose to save your character's life by taking permanent flaws. So if your opponents shoot you in the face, you could be like, now I'm going to be less intelligent for the rest of the game. So that's basically our core mechanics. We also have introduced a magic system.
All right, so our magic system is split into 5 separate domains: arcane, fey, spirit, demonic, and eldritch. Each domain of magic has a separate set of mechanics and characteristics to it. You can usually accomplish something different ways through each of the magic systems. They just each have their own different flavor and kind of way of being implemented. Each one is really kind of unique to the type of caster that is using it.
So do you guys want to run through each one real quick and give a brief overview?
Yeah, sure. So arcane, which I mentioned first, is typically used by the government and the church as kind of the most socially acceptable form of magic to be used, and it's mostly utilized to counteract and control other forms of magical casters and mancers, which we'll be getting into here shortly.
Yeah. We also have Fey magic, which is more akin to old European folk tales, as well as influenced by some Portuguese and other cultures all around the world. It is more of tricking, deceiving, and changing reality so that it benefits you. The cost, though, is that the same fortresses that you call upon also will trick you.
And that brings us to one of the other magic domains, my favorite, which is spirit magic. So spirit magic is very different based on how you want it to be played. So in the lore, there's the world tree, and we have the leaves, the trunk, and the roots, and each spirit spell can be attuned to one of these three. So you have your core mechanic, such as protecting yourself, and then based on the themes of the leaves, trunk, and roots, it'll modify that spell and give you additional benefits, which I think is really cool and makes a very...
It makes sure that each caster is not the same when it comes to spirit mages.
Yeah.
We also have demonic magic, which is the cheap, fast, and dirty magic compared to the others, where you sacrifice your hit points to your demonic gods in order to make everyone feel bad about everything, life included. And the core mechanic based around that is that if you are successful in killing whatever you were casting demonic magic on, you don't have to pay the cost because their soul is gone now.
And last but not least, we have Eldritch Magic. This is a lot of kind of Lovecraftian and body horror themes. You are driving yourself and your enemies insane and just performing acts that defy all explanation and logic, shattering both the body and the mind.
And to call back on the sanity, it does use your sanity to cast.
And that brings us to Mancies. So Mancies are what you might find flavor-wise in sorceries in other systems. So they are, as opposed to magic, which is a specific spell for a specific task, Mancies are more like a Swiss Army knife, where maybe your tool for a specific task isn't the greatest, but you can usually accomplish what you're trying to do within the general realm of each Mancy with the broader tool set that you have. So, for example, we have pyromancy, so that is setting things on fire, primarily sensing heat. So one example, combat-wise, is you can just throw a fireball at someone. It's pretty good. It's not super inventive. Another thing you can do is if someone's in cover, you can sense their heat if they're within a certain distance. So you can be a very sneaky pyromancer, not the big flash and show devastation everywhere pyromancer. And if you go that way, you could just sneak around, sense someone behind a wall, and then like grab them from the other side of the wall, pull them over, assassinate them, and move on with your day.
You also can use this pyromancy as an investigative ability because you can sense how long someone's been dead by their body temperature. You also can tell like how long the car was resting there when you're staking out like the bad guy's house. It also has a lot of other utilitarian point of view other than being the damage dealer. We also have, on the opposite of that, cryomancy. Now, with our psychic powers, Mancies, they, if you know one, you can never learn its exact opposite, because the whole point of psychic powers is that it changes your state of mind. So because it's just so foreign to you, you will never be able to learn it. Cryomancy is the opposite of pyromancy naturally. You can do there's some overlap between them, like with the heat sense that we brought up earlier, but it is more about protection of oneself using ice and also freezing everyone in a square, like freezing everyone around you, yeah.
So that kind of rolls over into the next pairing, which is magneticism and telekinesis. So someone with control over magnetism obviously affects metallic objects, senses metal currents, has a lot of out-of-combat application for things like picking locks, opening doors, flicking the safety on a gun, pulling a pin out of a grenade. Wonderful, wonderful in-combat and out-of-combat applications. Just anything that's made of metal, it's your plaything. Telekinesis, on the other hand, is your standard book, movie, characteristic trope of pick something up and throw it with your mind. Or something more delicate if that's what you want, I guess.
And the next pairing after that is biomancy and necromancy. So biomancy is all about buffing yourself, buffing your friends, making sure that everyone is sort of staying alive through the fight, while at the same time walking up to other people and sucking the life force out of them if you want to be a body horror vampire sort of player. It also lets you do things from a roleplay point of view, which you'll notice everything that we've talked about has roleplay application and combat application, because we really want both of those to be on equal playing fields. So for the roleplay application, you can do things like change your facial structure, change your body structure, and stuff like that for biomancy. And then necromancy is sort of your typical raising the dead, combining dead things into bigger dead things that are more and more terrible. But it also allows you to do things like investigate a dead body, figure out exactly what killed them, and stuff like that.
We also have, last but not least, neuromancy. In our lore, neuromancy is one of the rarest kinds of mancy, and they are particularly hard to catch because they mess with everybody's minds. So as long as whatever you are fighting or talking to or trying to persuade has a mind, you do have an advantage. But if they're mindless creatures like the necromancer zombies or jellyfish, you're kind of screwed. What we've learned from other D20 systems, because we're not trying to completely reinvent the wheel, we're just trying to make certain applications that we find in other games kind of lackluster, more engaging. We've also just brought over general combat systems from other D20 systems, just like action economy and turn order and very basic stuff. We've also have skills that are all found in other systems regardless of die. So your character, as they level up, will passively level up skills with that, so that people have the ability to do combat as well as roleplay stuff. So no one is literally just the brute that can't have any roleplay potential.
All right, and the last thing, just kind of in the overall game arc, I would say, is we are a classless D20 system. So you're not going to be locked into something like, oh, I'm playing a wizard, oh, I'm playing a fighter, I'm playing a gunslinger, what have you. Any character can kind of pick and choose among all of these mechanics what it is you and the player and your character want to be good at, and mix and match these in new and interesting ways for whatever kind of utility or character arc you're building for.
So our general lore is that the world itself is completely encapsulated by the wall. Now, no one in recorded history knows when the wall existed, when it came into existence. Most people believe that it was there long before the world began. But there is one fact that looms over everybody's life, and that is they are stuck within the world with the wall around it constantly. 233 years ago, somebody, a gray scientist, broke a hole into this wall. The reasoning is now lost to history, but the effects are still felt. There is new diseases, new monsters. This also awoken the Mancies that we've discussed earlier, as well as buffed magic from a alchemical backwater kind of practice to a more prevalent and powerful force in the world. So the world has definitely changed in the last 200 some odd years, but the wall is always a main fixture of it. That goes on to our races. We have soulmenders, which existed before the wall itself. They are... before the breach. Before the breach itself, where it was a fad used by the rich to keep their loved ones on Acheron itself. When they died near a piece of soul metal, their soul possessed it, would be captured in it. But when they started putting them in automaton-like bodies, they quickly found out, once they were able to communicate with the soul, that the soul doesn't remember their past life. So now they are completely different people. Some maintain the same personality they did in life, while others have completely different traits and personalities and all different sorts of quirks. Yeah, indeed. So now soulmenders are mainly done with insurance policies. If you died in a horrible industrial accident, you could ask to be, well, you couldn't ask then, but in your life insurance policy, you could ask to be a soulmender, or you were part of a rich to-do family that wanted to see if you would be Uncle Ben again, and found out that you are now a carouser. But that is soulmenders. We also have a race of dark leechers.
Would you like me to take that one?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So dark leechers appeared at the same time as the breach. After the breach was created, they started washing up on the shores of the ocean with no memory of where they came from, who they are, what they were, none of it. Just completely new to the world. And the immediate reaction of the populations that encountered them was essentially just to slaughter them en masse. They appear largely human, but with supernatural traits aligned to the various kind of supernatural types we described in magic. So you might have demonic with horns or certain natural traits for other variants. After a while, the central government started shipping them off to what was then the frontiers, both for safety and to keep them away from the bulk of society. And that finally brings us to the bulk of the human population.
All right. So humans are very diverse. They, quote-unquote, basic human is pretty much anything you can think of, but we also have different pedigrees, and these often follow the lines of the major families. So 3 pedigrees are the Greys, who are very industrious, highly mixed peoples that, through marriage over time, integrated the most sort of eccentric and brilliant people of the different ages. Then you have the Elsons, who are very old, close-knit, not really totally accepting of the outside world family. They're a little bit stuck in the past because they've been around since before the breach. They've managed to survive through that era of destruction and still come out on top on the other side. And there is the Exalted. So the Exalted are people who were lepers, outcasts, and sort of shoved out of the central districts, out of society in general, and forced to live near the wall. And that has resulted in, over hundreds of years, these major mutations. So now they have sort of become their own race among themselves, even though we still categorize them as human. And they would categorize themselves as human because they've just had some bad luck over the past 150, 300, a couple years. We also have some other pedigrees that are based on their historical background and where they live currently, geographically, and sort of more loose-knit ways of keeping them together.
That brings us to our factions. Now, we've thrown around a lot of names already, so let's get to know them. The government. The government. It knows where you are, what you are doing, and it's trying to keep control. The government rose after the breach, well, a little bit before the breach, but that era of history is completely unknown to the majority of the population. Even the elite don't even know what was happening during that time. But after the government rose, it seized power over everything that it could, especially on the main portion of the world that wasn't separated by ocean. The government then established an iron grip over the population of the world. Now they have a weird, loose system that everyone is still loyal to, with each district that was preordained by the government now being ruled by a independent entity that still feels loyalty to the government itself. All districts that don't have that level of loyalty or do not go with the typical government style are labeled anarchist districts. Now, anarchist districts are arranged from a spectrum of very soft anarchy, where it's just like, oh, we like democracy, you know, so we're just going to have elected officials, but we like trade with the government, you know, to people who are basically penal colonies, where they're just like, yeah, we'll just throw a bunch of political dissonance in this area, and you guys figure out what your government is. We don't really care. With that, those anarchists are more on the borders and fringes of society, with a variety of different political views of like democracy, anarchism, neo-capitalism, and a bunch of other fun philosophies that most of our world just assumes exists.
All right, so that'll bring us to the Church of the Twin Gods. This is the only state-sponsored religion, according to the central government. It is a dualistic religion worshiping the twin gods Darium and Nyx. Darium being the god of darkness, intellect and knowledge, and death, and Nyx being passion, fire, light, and life. They have some idea of their own history. They maintain their own religious texts. They have their own traditions, their own prayers. They are a strong faction in and of themselves. And the core state-sponsored version of the church treats the two gods as equals and both as beneficent, roughly, deities. So the goal of any person is to live their life between the two gods, worshiping them both equally. The church, especially in modern times, competes with a variety of cults, both internal that say that Darium or Nyx are the superior deity to the exclusion of the other, as well as external cults worshiping various forms of magic or otherworldly entities. And they fight against these cults trying to steal away their religious followers, as well as against various otherworldly and dangerous entities as kind of protectors of their congregations.
And that brings us to the three major families that are big players. The first one I'm going to talk about, which is one of the pedigrees of human, is the Greys. So the Greys are the inventors, the scientists, the pursuers of knowledge at the expense of all else. So there's plenty of normal people in the world that go to university and become professors and all that, but the Greys are on a whole nother level. So One way to think of them is like the Rockefellers mixed with Nikola Tesla.
It's basically if Tesla and Edison, instead of being competitors, got married and had a few kids.
Yeah, so through generation after generation, they've become a very mixed, very dogmatic in their intellectual pursuits. But this also includes not just research and engineering, but art and poetry and philosophy. So if anyone is just very, very, very passionate about one thing and willing to not sleep, not eat, not drink in pursuit of that passion and sort of let themselves waste away and not care about anything outside of their realm, the Greys might go, maybe we should put a ring on that.
We also, another race, a pedigree that we've already stated is the Elsons. And as Joe said, they have a long history, and they have basically are the oldest known thing to exist in recorded history. They are basically have a monopoly on the banks. They own a majority of the money in the world, but that's just through conniving and their practices, and also their lockdown on certain mathematics. They have a lot of different fixtures in their organization style, to accounting colleges, to a organization that is their assassins, mercenaries, and specialized accountants known as tax collectors. They reinforce and do everything that the Elson main family wills. They are the product of people not being able to pay off their bills. And so instead of a life of their servitude, they will give up their children for a better life, potentially, with good education and a great workout regimen.
All right, and I think that takes us to the Freemen. So kind of building on the family monopoly architecture that was set up by the Greys and the Elsons preceding them, the nascent Dark Leecher society decided that they were going to do something similar and set up the Freeman family to represent kind of the interests of Dark Leechers and their allies. So they control a lot of the farming interests that rose from the frontier areas that the government exported them to after their arrival in the world, and tend to be kind of an insular and protective family, just trying to make sure that Dark Leechers at large get by in the world.
And that brings us to three more major factions. Now, these factions are highly decentralized, opposed to all the others we've mentioned. So the first one is the Hunters Guilds. So there are monsters in this world. They are awful. They are not necessarily taken care of by the government or any other faction, and that's where the Hunters Guild comes in. So they will either, for sport, for research, because a village paid them, whatever it is, will go out and specifically kill monsters and make sure that the populace is generally safe when the government and other factions can't handle what's going on at any given time. The next is the Historians of Galilee. So they have been essentially a knowledge cult that has been around for however long, hundreds of years documented, probably before the breach, also as different researchers and things of that nature. So they have been trying to compile history throughout all this dark age of knowledge that's been imposed by the government. And now, with the Reclamation Act passed, which we'll get into a little bit later in the video, they have come to the forefront with a lot of new members, and also all of their previous knowledge really giving them a step up on all the other factions who are just getting into the business of figuring out what the heck was going on over the past couple hundred years. And lastly, there is the Wexler Investigation Agency. There are a lot of minor factions in the world, whether they be cults, different families, etc. And the Wexlers have built a network of different specialized agents to take care of issues that the larger families would just send their own personal protectors and enforcers to take care of. Instead, the Wexlers are hired out by these smaller factions to do the same thing. So you might end up having a case where someone wants to steal technologies from a gray factory, and the Wexlers are the ones hired to do that. The Elsons are really crushing down on a local union group because they don't want them to unionize, but the union's got enough money to hire some Wexler boys to make sure that nothing bad happens. So they'll basically take any job that anyone can pay for.
So, if you've looked at our Kickstarter or have gone to our site, you've probably noticed our map. Just a broad overview, all those lines on the page show the district lines. We've already mentioned them before. We've already talked about how they're basically their own contained entity. But the central districts around the Cradle Sea is the central districts. This is where the government rules the most. It is most urbanized, and it has the highest population numbers. As you breach out, the influence of the families and other organizations become more paramount. They become more adapted to that. But past that, you enter frontier, where technology can be anywhere between this town has just installed the first telegraph wire to a pet project by the Grey that has a weird kind of commune science factory or something of that nature out there. The technology in the frontier range wildly, while everything in faction-controlled territory or central district, you're probably going to have a phone line in every house. So you have to keep that in mind when you are planning your next setting on what level of technology you would like, because we do have the isolated backwater who still have pitchforks and torches, who have a count in a manor, who could potentially be a vampire or something worse.
And on that subject, so we wanted to make sure our world not only was realistic, but was also that our world was not only realistic, but also that we had a lot of different environments to play in. So Maya, who is a geologist, made our map, made it completely accurate as far as you can get a map inside of a wall to be accurate. Mm-hmm. And off of that, all our different biomes were designed. So we have jungle in the west, we have forests in the east, we have desert in the north, we have prairies, we have steppe, we have a nice foggy interior coastline. Essentially anywhere you do want to play, we do have that option in the world. And that comes with its own monsters and societies and things like that fit in that different biome box.
All right. So to go into a little more detail about kind of the tech levels that we're dealing with here, around the central districts, things are semi-modernized, maybe you could say. So they have radio, they have telephones, they have cars. A lot of this is built up around kind of the architecture that existed before the breach. So you have large urban centers with large populations, public transit. All of that is very firmly under the control of the central government. That's where they built their power base. As you go further and further out, you get less of the trappings of modern society. So the Greys are putting in power lines and telegraph wires and the occasional phone line. There might be one railroad that runs through town kind of thing, just standard frontier fare. The further out you go, the less government influence you have. So in the central districts, most people aren't even going to think about magic as a thing that really exists. If they do, it's a miraculous feat of the church. It's not something they deal with in their everyday life. Monsters are a curiosity to be laughed at in the frontier newspapers, and Mancies are horribly dangerous abilities possessed by a few very, very dangerous individuals. As you get further out, people become more comfortable with the supernatural as part of their daily life. Farmers down out on the frontiers have to cope with the fact that monsters are a very real thing. They have to deal with what happens when something supernatural enters into their life. They're more open to the idea of magical abilities offsetting all of the dangerous things that go bump in the night. So you might have kind of a more wholesome view of magic, but that also opens the door to cult activity and using monsters and monstrous abilities to fight other monsters, which also means, of course, that the church has a bit more interest in stamping out those ideas on the frontiers.
And speaking of monsters, a lot of different tabletops have monsters which can feel like bullet sponges or just aren't super interesting beyond their visual design. And we wanted to take some cues from some of our favorite properties, such as the Witcher series and Bloodborne, and bring all of that, those extra stages and those extra evolutions that monsters have, and put that in a tabletop. So all our monsters will have different weaknesses at either certain times, or because they're exposed to mercury, or because it's this phase of the moon, or because you threw cinnamon in their face. Whatever it is, they'll have weaknesses that you can exploit, and we think that really helps with the issue in a lot of games of you're not the combat-focused one, and in our game that doesn't really matter. We could have a group of researchers, and there's a monster under the university, and you gotta figure out what it is, because it keeps eating your students. So you go hit the books, and you figure out it's probably this type of monster. Its weakness is this. You go in with a fire hose full of cinnamon, spray it down, stab it in the heart with some silver knife, combat's over. So that's a very different flavor than just going in, guns blazing all the time, throwing explosives down a hallway. But we have both options. So you can try and exploit those weaknesses, or you can say we don't have time and just go for it.
To be clear, I don't think anything's weakness is actually cinnamon.
No, we know.
Not yet.
That's for packs and patrons.
Okay.
We've also have, for a majority of our monsters in our world, we have cut them up into our domains of magic. Now, the creatures are just loosely categorized in this because it makes the government's job slightly easier, but it will also help your DM in the long run. So when you are in the or when you're in the woods, you could encounter fae or spirits. When you are in urban centers, you could deal with possible demonic cults or eldritch entities that are always looming around the corner. We've already kind of gone through some inspirations of our creatures, but when it comes to eldritch in particular, it does have its roots in Lovecraftian horror. With the cosmic horror aspect. And we try to keep that in a role-playing game that kind of gets lost when they're put to paper, like giving Cthulhu a stat block. So we are trying to keep the horror aspect of our creatures, and not all of them can be won by simply weight of fire. You have to know your enemy, and sometimes there is more to do than other creatures. So a lot of plot lines that are going to involve greater deities like greater demons or spirits or fey lords or possibly Cthulhu himself, you're going to not be able to just ram a boat into him. You're going to have to learn spells or a way to send them back to their realm.
And on that note of our different categories of monsters, I just want to make sure that we're clear that it's not just the 5 categories of magic. We also have typical humans like gangsters, mafia, different brutes, stuff like that. And then we have animals, post-breach animals, which are these mutated horrors, and also things like outsiders, which are very alien, like almost beyond Lovecraftian alien. No one really understands them. They appeared after the breach. They have no real connection to our world. So we have a lot of different categories and flavors, from everything from your typical werewolf all the way to just crazy stuff we don't think you have ever seen before. And on that note, this is a very mature game if you haven't gotten that feeling yet, and we want everyone to make sure that as a GM you're aware, as a player you're aware, and if there's anything you're uncomfortable with, to make sure to have those discussions before game. We have a sanity system that lets you experience a lot of different types of traumas and recover from those traumas, but people are often uncomfortable with different kinds of traumas, and that is something to keep in mind.
So, that brings us to the current state of Acheron, of the world itself. As we've mentioned briefly, there is the Reclamation Act that has been passed, and Ryan will go into that in just a little bit. But the world is now in flux. The power is not only in the government's hands, it is now in your hands as a player. There is a lot more freedom to be had in the world. There is a bunch of organizations that are filling up and eating the gaps that the government is slowly letting in through the cracks. And you, as a player and as a team of players, are going to have to figure out what storylines you want to go down, what opportunities are you going to take, and what demons are you going to slay.
So the Reclamation Act was an idea to essentially force the government to give more freedom to study the past, to discover where did the government come from, what happened before the breach, what led up to it, what caused it, and how did we get where we are now. These things can sometimes take an interesting turn, and the government just said, okay, go wild, it's all up to you now, learn whatever you want, be it on your own head, because the government censored history for centuries, and they truly believe that they did this for a reason. It is now up to everyone to decide, was that a good reason, and are we going to ignore it and just dive as deep as we can into this world of horrors and otherworldliness, or are we going to keep to this very, very safe, very, very controlled, very, very collected, very almost totalitarian way of life, but a very stable and, for most people, well, very livable way of life. You may not have as much freedom as you want, but you're not going to have to worry about something crawling out of a mirror and eating you while you sleep.
So, why is our Kickstarter going now? There's a multitude of different reasons. One, we've been working on this for the last 7 years, all three of us. It has evolved beyond what we can really keep contained anymore, and like, we are just trying to share this with the rest of you. Some of the themes and some of the themes that we are going forth with this has a lot of present application. There is a lot of very interesting parallels that we never intended that could be drawn on. None of, like, all the stuff that you may find metaphor in or subtext, and we didn't really intend, but go wild. So we are also in the middle of a pandemic, and COVID is still, at least in the States and other countries, are not completely managed yet or adapted around. So we are trying our best in order to give you guys digital copies and keep you guys engaged online so that everyone is still safe.
So please visit our website. We have pages devoted to some of the lore, and we also have a fully playable beta. Download that, print out some of our pre-generated characters, try our character creation, read through our rules. If you're interested, maybe get a couple of your friends together on Discord, run a quick game, and see if this is something you'd be interested in going forward.
And if you have already donated to our Kickstarter, thank you so much. We appreciate it. This is sort of a fever dream of having this actually happen because, like Travis said, we've been working on this for years and years, and it started as just a evolution of us wanting to have some more mechanics or some different kinds of monsters and things like that, and has become its own full-fledged system that everyone we've play tested with seems to enjoy quite a bit. So we're trying to take this the extra mile and get it out to everyone. So if you've become a part of that, thank you so much.
And if you can't donate right now, because we know times are ridiculous at the very least, don't feel like you have to. Please share us with your friends and family and rich friends and other people. Any press that we can get, or any exposure we can get, that's the word, is honestly fantastic. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
And we will see you in Acheron.
Thanks, everybody.